It is the Resistance Report for April 10th, 2017. Good evening. The theme we are going to emphasize tonight is thinking about the institutions of government, thinking about the long-term effects of what you are doing, something that Donald Trump and the people around him obviously are not doing, except with regard to one particular decision. And that decision had to do with Neil Gorsuch, who today was sworn in this morning as Justice of the Supreme Court. Gorsuch is 49 years old. He's now the youngest person on the court. The next youngest is Elena Kagan, who is 57. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was appointed by Bill Clinton, is now 84 years old. Anthony Kennedy, the court's swing vote, who was appointed by Reagan and for whom Gorsuch once clerked, is now 80 years old. Stephen Breyer, a Clinton appointee, is now 78 years old. Now bear those numbers in mind. Nobody can predict the future, obviously, but if you are putting somebody on the court who is 49 years old, the chances are that you're putting that person on there not just for the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 8 or 12 years, possibly for decades to come, which is why this appointment is so important. In fact, he was sworn in this morning, but he will go to work almost immediately. The court meets privately on Thursday to consider what cases it's going to take for next term of the Supreme Court. And Neil Gorsuch is going to be part of that meeting. He's going to be perhaps the swing vote on deciding what cases the court considers. And on that list of potential cases is a plea that the court decide whether the Second Amendment grants a right to carry firearms outside the home. Another asks whether businesses may refuse to provide wedding services to same-sex couples. Next week, the court begins its last round of oral arguments for the term, and Gorsuch will be sitting in on those oral arguments. He has in the past defended the rights of religious objectors to laws they say violate their belief. So he could be the deciding vote in a major separation of church and state case from Missouri, which will be argued very soon. Neil Gorsuch will, in all likelihood, be Donald Trump's most lasting legacy. Now, we wish him well. Mostly, though, we hope that he puts ideology aside and considers first and foremost the common good. What Americans need now in the 21st century, not the 18th century. Which gets me, in terms of thinking institutionally, thinking about long-term consequences of what you're doing to the governing structure of America, I can't help but mention once again Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is sort of the person in the background with regard to Neil Gorsuch and much else. I can't think of a man who has done more in recent years to undermine the functioning of the United States government than Mitch McConnell. A lot of people are saying, in wake of the Gorsuch confirmation, that this is a great victory for Mitch McConnell, that he ought to be enormously proud, and he's acting awfully proud. I think it's just the opposite. I think he ought to be ashamed of what he has done and how he did it, because it has a lasting impact. It has a lasting consequence for the institutions of our government, how the Senate operates, for example. You may remember that as majority leader of the Senate in 2010, Mitch McConnell famously declared that the single, and I'm quoting him now, the single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. The single most important objective. Now that's the majority leader of the Senate speaking. When you think of all of the other things that could have been a major objective for the Senate, for the government of the United States, for the majority leader, his number one objective was to make Obama a one-term president. By 2013, Mitch McConnell had led filibusters of 79 of Obama's court nominees. That's compared to 68 filibusters in the entire previous history of the United States. I just want to say that once again so we have a context for understanding the contributions of Mitch McConnell to the deterioration of the Senate. By 2013, he had led filibusters against 79 of Barack Obama's nominees to the federal court system, compared to 68 filibusters against nominees to the federal courts in the entire history of the United States. After Justice Antonin Scalia died and his death was confirmed last year, it took Mitch McConnell less than 1 hour to say that that vacancy should be filled by the next president. This weekend, there are a lot of comments about how insightful Mitch McConnell was to act so quickly, to think so quickly. That is not a matter of insight. That's a matter of party politics, folks. That's not a matter of statesmanship. That's a matter of being very quick on your feet in terms of what your partisan needs are. He called keeping Obama's nominee off the court, quote, one of my proudest moments, unquote. Well, you can be proud, Mitch, if you want to be proud. The rest of us regard it as one of your most shameful moments, not out of partisanship, but again, out of thinking institutionally, thinking about what you did and have done to the Senate. Although McConnell's predecessors as majority leader, they haven't all been models of collegiality, but at least they have tried to be collegial, tried to reach out to members on the other side of the aisle. What does Mitch McConnell do? You remember? He silenced Elizabeth Warren. Unheard of in the Senate. And then on Thursday came his use of the nuclear option. That is, breaking the Senate rules and having Gorsuch confirmed by 51 votes, ending the tradition of the filibuster, dating back to 1789. 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, when Obama was president, McConnell said he would abolish the filibusters of Supreme Court justices only, he said, if there were 67 senators in favor of doing that. He did it with 51 senators. Mitch McConnell is not just a hypocrite. He has left in his wake, and history will judge him to have left behind him a Senate that is far less capable of fulfilling its mission. That is not success. Across government, across American society today, you have more and more people, whether they're CEOs, or they're on Wall Street, or they're in government, wherever they are, what they are doing is they are ripping off institutions. They're basically saying, my short-term goals, my greed, my party, my personal needs take precedence over making this institution work in the future. Today, Wells Fargo report showing that its top 2 officers basically disregarded all of the signs that Wells Fargo was defrauding customers. Why did its top 2 officers disregard all of those signs? Why did they risk a major drop in public trust toward Wells Fargo, toward the entire banking system, for the same reason that Wall Street bankers, for years before 2008, put their own needs and their greed ahead of the institutional responsibilities of the financial industry. They made a lot of money. Not one of them went to jail. But they helped contribute to cynicism about all the major institutions of our society. Which gets us back to Donald Trump. Talk about cynicism. In last year's campaign, Donald Trump said that he would not spend time playing golf if elected president, including the courses he owns. He would not go to those resorts. I'm going to quote him to you. This is only from a few years ago. Quote, "You know what? And I love golf," he said, "but if I were in the White House, I don't think I'd ever seen Turnberry," that's his resort in Scotland, again. "I don't think I'd ever seen Doral again. I own Doral in Miami. I don't think I'd ever seen many of the places that I have," he said. "I don't ever think that I'd see anything. I want to stay in the White House and work my ass off. Make great deals, right? Who's going to leave? Who's going to leave the White House?" Unquote. A few years ago, he criticized President Obama. Can you believe that with all of the problems and difficulties facing the United States, President Obama spent the day playing golf? Unquote. Well, it turns out that over a third of the time that Donald Trump has been president of the United States so far, he's been outside the White House. He hasn't been on foreign trips, visiting foreign countries. He hasn't been touring endangered areas of the United States or where tragedies have occurred around the world. No, Donald Trump has been out of the White House at his resorts. Over a third of the time he has been president, he's been hopping from one resort to another, giving them enormous free publicity along the way. But Trump doesn't seem to care about conflicts of interest or free publicity. He does care about his golf resorts. And by the way, that costs a lot. It costs you a lot, it costs me a lot, it costs taxpayers a lot. Secret Service protection, actually taking the entire White House, essentially, and outsourcing it to Mar-a-Lago in Florida. That's where he's going again. He's getting ready to head off once again to Mar-a-Lago. Not to mention the cost of Secret Service protection for Ivanka and Jared and sons Eric and Donald Jr. When Eric and Donald Jr. are globetrotting for the Trump business, they get all of the Secret Service protections that you and I give them, and that's a lot. That's a lot of money. And of course, Donald Trump's family back in New York. Donald Trump criticized Barack Obama not only for playing golf, but for being out of the White House. In 1 month, Donald Trump has spent more taxpayer money than Barack Obama did in an entire year on Secret Service protection for himself, for his family, on moving the White House. Trump says he needs time out of Washington. He needs a retreat. You know, there used to be something called Camp David. Anybody remember Camp David? That was where presidents went when they needed a retreat, when they met with foreign dignitaries and wanted to meet them outside the White House, when they wanted to meet with their staffs, when they wanted time alone. They went to Camp David. Camp David is not very luxurious. It's not a spa, it doesn't have a golf course. In fact, it's pretty Spartan. I've been there. I was there when I was in the cabinet. They're basically bunk beds. I cannot imagine Donald Trump at Camp David. But you know something? Camp David was set up just for what Donald Trump is spending money doing. Meanwhile, more news of chaos in the Trump White House. Again, the theme tonight, thinking institutionally. Well, Trump promised that if he became president, he would whip government into shape. Actually, what he has done is whip his White House into a den of palace intrigue, of backbiting, knife fights, backstabbing. According to the New York Times, the main players have grown so wary of leaving Trump's side that it has become hard to organize meetings of senior staff officials without him, and difficult for him to arrange meetings without inviting almost everybody who's fighting in the White House along to thrash through policies or hiring choices. And this means slowing up an already fitful process. Reince Priebus, his chief of staff, remains in a hot spot. Trump is fond of asking visitors, how do you think Reince is doing? How do you think Reince is doing? How would you feel? You're chief of staff, and you read day after day, this isn't the first article, day after day you read that your boss, Donald Trump, is asking people how you're doing, and then he's letting those people tell the press that he's been asked. And he's asking. Which may be why policy is so hard to discern from the Trump White House. For example, the administration appears completely divided on whether the United States is pursuing a policy change in Syria. Days after the first direct American military attack against the Syrian government. Now, Rex Tillerson, who's supposed to be Secretary of State, supposed to know these things, yesterday he told George Stephanopoulos on ABC News, he said, the Thursday strike was related solely to the most recent horrific use of chemical weapons. The goal of the attack was to send a message to Syrian President Assad and its ally Russia that the United States would not tolerate the use of chemical weapons. Other than that, there's no change in our military posture. In other words, according to Rex Tillerson, what we did last week in attacking Assad, attacking the Syrian government for the first time, a direct attack, that was just sending a message. But United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley yesterday said that there was a completely different purpose. She said there can be no peace in Syria with Assad in power. Now that sounds an awful lot like regime change to me. Does it to you? That's not sending a message. That's an invitation for the United States to get deeper and deeper into this conflict, into this war. Which is it? Tillerson or Nikki Haley? Does anybody know? Does anybody in the White House know? Does Donald Trump know? Meanwhile, we are told the investigation continues into possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives over swinging the election of 2016 for Donald Trump. Don't lose track of this. The Trump fog machine continues to create more and more derivative stories, more and more diversions, more and more ways of taking your mind and the press attention off of this. Don't allow them to. Finally, I want to say that your member of Congress is on recess. Your members of Congress, both your representative and also your senators, are on recess. What they do on recess, they usually go home. And what they do when they go home, if they are responsible members of Congress, is they hold meetings. Some of them hold town halls. Some of them hold informal meetings. Some of them simply meet with constituents in schools, in auditoriums, in public places. But this is your opportunity to hold your members of Congress responsible. A few of you have written to me today, said your member of Congress refuses to have a town hall meeting. Well, if he or she refuses to have a town hall meeting, you know what you do? You tell the press, you and your indivisible group or another group, you're going to have a town hall meeting. You've invited your member of Congress, and you're going to have a cardboard cutout of your member of Congress right there. In fact, you're going to invite a lot of people. You're going to say that we hope that your member of Congress comes to that meeting. You can't guarantee it. Your member of Congress has been invited. And if your member of Congress does not come, that itself becomes a story, because then you and others are complaining that they are not holding any town meetings, that they're afraid of you. They're afraid of their constituents. That's called not being accountable to voters. They may be afraid of their constituents, but you know something? They're more afraid of bad press. One final thing I want to make absolutely sure that you know, because several of you have asked, that the Resistance Report is now a podcast. It is available on iTunes, and that's in response to many of you who've said you would like it as a podcast. It is a podcast. It is on iTunes. It is the Resistance Report. Now your questions. Diana Hammerdorfer. Why are Republicans who are concerned about the budget deficit not calling out how much Trump and his family's constant trips are costing all of us? Diana, they are not calling Trump out on that because basically they are not concerned about the budget deficit, or else they don't want to in any way antagonize somebody who is putatively the head of their party and has a lot of power. Janet Belknap. We've learned that Jared Kushner lied about his extensive contacts with Russian bankers and business figures when applying for his security clearance. Can this security clearance be revoked? Janet, obviously a security clearance can be revoked, but that requires some sort of ethics investigation or some sort of investigation. There is an office of ethics that's supposed to make these investigations. And it should be very busy right now, given all of the at least alleged ethics violations in the Trump administration. Not only Jared, but also his wife Ivanka, also members of Trump's cabinet, also members of Trump's White House. But as far as I know, there are not investigations going on. Why could that be? Why are there not investigations? Does it have anything to do with the fact that the Office of Ethics has no interest in investigating? Does it have to do with the fact that the Office of Ethics is under the control of the House and indirectly the Senate, and they are both under control of Republicans? That was a rhetorical question. Peggy Hoxwender. We did not elect Jared Kushner or Ivanka Trump to represent us. How is Trump getting away with blatant nepotism? Are there no laws in place to prevent this? Peggy, there is a law. It's called the Anti-Nepotism Law. It was enacted precisely to stop this kind of nepotism. And there are two major purposes to be served. One, to make sure that a president, by hiring relatives, is not engaging in a kind of backdoor to conflicts of interests in which presidential decisions enrich his family or her family. And the second is to make sure that the people around a president have the public interest at heart and not only protecting the back of the president. Now, why aren't the anti-nepotism rules being enforced now? Because the Justice Department is in charge of enforcing them. The Justice Department is in turn in charge, run by Jeff Sessions, who is basically part of not only the Trump administration, but also was part of the Trump campaign. You see what I'm getting back to with several of these questions? I'm getting back to the reality of power. Many of you are justifiably and rightfully enraged and outraged that some of these laws are being broken. Many of them are just being, the nose of Donald Trump and others are being thumbed. Their noses are thumbed at these laws and regulations and norms. But as long as they are in power and as long as nobody can do anything about it and is willing to do anything about it because Republicans don't want to take them on, nothing will be done. Pamela Kelly, what is the fiduciary rule and what does its delay mean for us? Pamela, the fiduciary rule is a very simple rule and it should have been in place years ago. It states very directly that if you have a financial advisor or a stockbroker or anybody else who's handling your money, they have a responsibility to you, not to themselves, not to their firms, not to a big bank. Their responsibility, first and foremost, is to you, and they have to act in your interest, not in their own interest and not in their bank's interest. But the Trump administration wants to delay the fiduciary rule. It's a rule that came up through the Labor Department, and the Trump administration wants it to be delayed. There is no good reason to delay it. Franklin Guadelia, how can we battle gerrymandering in this country? Have Democrats hurt their chances by cramming into cities, leaving many districts red? Franklin, Democrats, when they have had the power in the states, have often done as much gerrymandering as Republicans. The only difference is that recently Republicans have very powerful technological weapons, algorithms, to do gerrymandering so it's more precise than ever before. So they can essentially pack all of the Democrats together and spread their own Republican supporters around, and so that the Republicans have a majority in most districts, while the Democrats are packed together. What's the way out? Well, the best way out, it seems to me, is something like was done in California and being attempted in a number of other states, and that is to take the districting decisions, how the boundaries are drawn, out from under the politicians and put it in an independent citizens commission with a request, and actually the requirement, that districts be contiguous. That is, they have a shape that is a square or a circle, but it is a recognizable, symmetrical as possible shape. Two more questions. Anna Schultz, who, if anyone, is working on getting Trump's taxes revealed? Anna, there are several lawsuits that are proceeding in the federal courts. The big question is standing. Who has the standing? Who has the right in court to demand that Trump's taxes be revealed? Well, the courts are struggling with that. There's no clear decision yet. But I think also public opinion is important. Public opinion counts. And as we approach tax day, April 15th, there are going to be a lot of demonstrations around this issue. Donald Trump has got to reveal his taxes. And if Donald Trump and the Republicans want tax reform, if they want to make any changes in the tax code, it is doubly necessary for Donald Trump to reveal his taxes, because otherwise we will not have any way of knowing whether he is supporting certain changes in the tax code because it helps him or it helps the United States. In other words, there's no way of avoiding what certainly appears to be a conflict of interest unless we know the truth about Trump's taxes. Scott Kudrank, I think much of the problem with the electorate is the tendency to vote based on stereotypes of party ideals and then ignore the news. and assume everything is either fine or beyond their control. How can we foster a more educated electorate? Scott, it is vitally important that two specific things occur. Number one, that we recognize the truth, that we not be misled by lies, especially lies coming out of the administration, especially lies coming from the President of the United States, who says outrageous and outlandish things, such as 3 to 5 million people voted fraudulently in the 2016 election, when we know there's not one shred of evidence. When he says Donald Trump was wiretapped by Barack Obama, that Barack Obama wiretapped him in the campaign when there's no shred of evidence. In other words, he says things for which there is no factual basis. So we've got to know that, number one. We've got to spread the truth. Number two, we also have got to, all of us, get in the habit of thinking critically. And by that I simply mean we can't assume that because somebody has said something, it is necessarily the truth. We've got to demand that we adhere to sources of truth that are credible. There's a lot of, and Donald Trump is responsible for this, using the same techniques that Russian operatives used in the 2016 election. That is fake news. Stuff that looks titillating and looks like it could possibly be factual, but if you applied any kind of critical thinking and asked yourself, do I trust this source? Does this source have any integrity? You might come to a very different decision. So in other words, look at who and under what circumstances the truth or these facts are being given you, and also fight lies. Fight for the truth. There's no easier way. I think one of the greatest and most distressing challenges, threats to our democracy, is Donald Trump's unwillingness to be truthful. It is not simply carelessness. It's not just embellishing the facts. It is a willful, intensely, without any evidentiary basis, attempt to sell the public on facts that are not facts. We've never had this before. We've never had a president so willing to lie through his teeth. And the media have got to call it exactly what it is, a lie. Not a disputed contention, not facts that are in contention or dispute, but lies. Finally, let me just say, on this theme, all of this, all of it, depends on you. Many of your questions tonight had a question behind the question, which is, how can he get away with this? Well, he can get away with it, and so can members of his administration, if we do not have the power to stop him. Now, there will be and has been pushback from the federal courts. There will be and there has been a great deal of pushback from the media. There have been very effective and I think courageous Republicans. John McCain, Lindsey Graham, others. But ultimately, it comes down to you. It comes down to your tenacity, your activism, your patience, your ability to mobilize and organize and energize other people. With regard to that, let me also just say, indivisibleguide.com will give you information as to where and when and if your members of Congress are holding town halls or any other meetings that you can attend, and what you can do if they are not. indivisiblegod.com. Also, want to just remind you again that the Resistance Report is now a podcast that is available on iTunes, but still do tune in. That's the end of tonight's Resistance Report. I'll see you tomorrow.